Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Andee Pittman. I'm a human-centered designer and researcher currently at the Office of the Chief of Human Resources Officer in the Government of Canada. And for those who don't know what that is, I try to help solve problems alongside the people who are impacted by the problems and impacted by its solutions. And here with me today, I have David.
Hello, Andy, and everybody. Thanks for having me on, and thanks to FWD50, this opportunity to share with you. I'm a conflict facilitator, and I work with organizations, groups, and individuals to help them move through and work with tensions and conflicts. And I use a model that I'll be sharing with you today. And before we go further, I just want to acknowledge the foundational conflict, in my opinion, that exists on the land I'm on, and really all over, the Americas and beyond, which is the ongoing tension around land ownership, stewardship. And so I find myself here on unceded traditional Coast Salish territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in Vancouver, BC. So I wanted to bring that in as the primary foundational conflict that I see in our world.
And I am recording from the unceded lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, where there are still ongoing land claims and just the need for recognition that this land is unceded. And I wanted to call out, even though I'm not on these lands, but the conflict that is happening with the Mi'kmaq. If you are not outraged by this, you need to learn more, and we all need to learn more. And that is why I submitted this talk, and I brought David on here to share some learning with us, because I think that the way we currently are navigating conflict does not seem to be working very well. But before we tackle all of colonization and all of systemic racism, let's start a little smaller and start with us. I want you to think about the last time that a project failed. I know this can be challenging, but I want you to think of why it failed and what the most uncomfortable part of that is. And I'm going to ask you to be bold, and all be bold together and write it in the chat. But don't hit send yet. We're going to do it all at the same time to make it a little bit easier for everyone. So just think, what was the most uncomfortable reason why it failed? And typing and waiting, and I will count down from 3 and we'll all hit send together. All right. 3, 2, 1, send. Now, if you didn't notice, David and I are pre-recorded on this talk, but we are live in the chat. So we are going to talk to you in 2 places at once, and we're going to engage with you on the chat. And we probably already are right now. It's kind of cool being 2 places at once, eh, David?
I didn't know I had this ability. I didn't know any of us had this ability.
It's quite fancy. They've really stepped up the game here at FWD50. So I think that if we look, there is some aspect of conflict, unresolved or unnavigated. And I think that also happens to be the part that is the hardest to talk about as public servants. I think this is where we actually need to start talking, because if we can't figure this part out, all of these things that we're trying to do in digital government that you're here to learn are not going to work. And I have a story that I think kind of tells this, because I have an experience that comes from the future of digital government. I was a Code for Canada fellow. Some of you may remember me in my red track jacket in the very first FWD50 conference 2 years ago. And for those of you who weren't familiar, Code for Canada Fellowship is the microcosm of digital government. You have a small multidisciplinary team, a designer, a product manager, a developer, working with government, in government, with policy, subject matter experts, and all other stakeholders to build a product, in our case, a public-facing beta tool in 9 months. And our project failed. I have come to realize why that is in these past 2 years of reflection. In the beginning, our interpersonal problems were manageable, but slowly as time went on, they became more problematic and more conflictual. And we did our best to solve things on our own. We took a whole day to meet and work things out and come up with new agreements and working norms. But they didn't work because we couldn't really get to the truth, the heart of the challenges that we were having. Because at the end of the day, we all really cared about each other. When we eventually sought support from our Code for Canada side, we had a lot of pressure. Time was running out. We had to deliver. So our support looked like having more clear roles and responsibilities and being monitored for progress, which was helpful, but ultimately was not solving the conflict. And then when we turned to our government partner side, our option was to get a conflict mediator, which was going to take 4 to 6 weeks, which at that point the project was going to be over. So we continued and pulled up our socks and delivered as much as we could. But I know for me personally, my mental health tanked. It was very, very difficult. And based on some of the things that you've shared on the chat today, I think you know maybe what that feeling is like. And that's the thing I want to help us all avoid. So I think that if we start to really build skills towards digital government, I think this is one of the skills that we have to bring in, because if we can't do this, we can't transform our policies, our government, and what is most important right now, becoming truly diverse and inclusive. David, tell me, what are your immediate thoughts about this story? What can we learn from it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's a lot of aspects in there, Andee, I think are really important. Sounds like you did some good work with trying to address things, but it didn't really resolve the issue. And you didn't really have the kind of support maybe that was needed. There's a time pressure. These are real world workplace experiences for a lot of people. The most predominant thing that I find in most any story of conflict is some level, some signal around avoidance. And before I move past avoidance, I just want to appreciate it for a moment and say, yeah, in some situations, avoidance is a highly intelligent thing to do. Particularly the two things that come to mind most strongly would be if I don't really have trust in someone, if there's low trust in the atmosphere between people, that might be a good reason to avoid conflict in the moment. And if we really don't have time and space to actually open it up in a direct way, then it's probably a good idea not to, at least temporarily. However, if avoidance is all we have, then we can't actually find a solution. And what we do is suffer because unprocessed conflict doesn't go anywhere. It hangs around and it really impacts us in a lot of devastating ways. I'd like to also bring in the part of your story around diversity and inclusion as our world, this part of the world in particular, is making much more overt efforts to bring in different voices into the space. That's beautiful. So we have more access to creativity, to possibilities, to new senses of reality, how different people perceive things. And that's great. And that also comes with more levels of difference. And that's where conflict comes from. So I agree with you. I think we need more styles, ways, methods, awarenesses around conflict to help us successfully navigate collaboration and diverse environments, because a lot of us didn't grow up collaborating. We went to schools, we sat in rows, we did individual work assignments, we were graded individually. And what we're talking about is doing something highly different than that. And it requires a kind of knowledge that individual siloed workplaces don't really engender, which is a depth of knowledge of each other and of ourselves. Who am I in this space? Who am I with you? what aspects of you bring out aspects of me. And again, there's beauty in that. There's all kinds of creativity and so on. And there's the kinds of differences that confront us and we go into tension. So I want to make a case here. We've used the metaphor of fire for this talk, sitting in the fire. And also there's fire on a lot of the slides people are seeing. And so I learned something a few years ago that as a conflict facilitator really excited me, even though it's a difficult thing in nature and it's a difficult thing in the human realm. It's something called ground fire. And ground fire is a real phenomenon that happens in forest fires. So obviously a lot of the fire in a forest fire burns up, but there's certain aspects of the fire that actually travel downwards into the ground through root systems, into certain kinds of soils like peat moss. And for example, the Fort McMurray fire of 2016 burned for over a year, which means it lasted over a year underground in the northern Alberta winter. That's how powerful ground fire is. It's got its own staying power. And when ground fire enters the system, when we can't see it anymore, we don't know where it's going to pop up next. And it's the same with us. We, as human beings, can experience ground fire. Our unprocessed conflicts hang around, smoldering, and they can just pop out at any given moment when people aren't expecting it. And often they amplify because we ruminate, we cycle on stuff, stay with thoughts and feelings and make up stories about each other and believe in them and add to them and so on. So yeah, a big question to ask ourselves in our workplaces as well as outside of work is what unresolved issues and feelings do we have about other people? And to look at that in this lens as fuel for ground fire. So when we talk about conflict, like forest fires, part of it's just natural. It's a natural repetitive experience to have difference of opinion that we care about, difference of feelings that we care about. And the main aspect or character of conflict is polarity. It's two sides saying no to each other. Us versus them thinking, the experience of one-sidedness, like I have to stand on my side and you seem against it, so I'm going to defend it and stand for it. There's the ever-present sort of feeling and fear about winning and losing. Do I look like I'm losing face here? Do I get the access to resources that I wanted? Are people listening to my opinions? Is that a win for me? And the whole thing is extremely stressful. So I want to speak to you about a model today that works with polarity in some different ways. And the model comes from something called process-oriented psychology. The shorthand term is process work. The founder is Dr. Arnold Mindell. And the essence of process work is to turn towards the thing that's bothering you, because that's where you're going to find the information you need to help solve that problem. So I'm going to use a 4-phase model of conflict that comes from process work as a way to introduce this style of working with a conflict to you. So we begin with phase 1. And phase 1 basically says, I'm good. Things are cool. I'm not interested in conflict right now. I'm feeling happy, or I'm busy doing something else. Or maybe I don't care about your thing. Whatever your problem is, I'm not interested in it, or I don't feel compelled to get involved, knowing that I'm going to have to change states and get into the mood where there's a bunch of polarity stuff going on, and I'm not into that right now. I'm more self-focused. So as a conflict facilitator, we never try and do conflict facilitation with people when they're in phase 1, because it won't work. They're not open to it. In phase 2, we're back to polarity. Phase 2 is most of what we've seen in this world, in our personal lives, internationally, etc. It's a feeling of me on my side and you on your side. We're not the same. You don't care about the things I care about. You have different values. I have to take a stand against you because you're going to get what I want, or if you get what you want, that's going to be bad for me or the world or things I care about. And there's often a feeling of stuckness, that we're in this duality that we can't get out of. There's a lot of energy in it, which we often express as fear, anger. There's a feeling of crackling in the atmosphere and heat. And again, that specter of like, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose, and it can't be us. We can't lose. It's too important, or we've lost before and that was terrible. So as a process facilitator, my role is to, first of all, slow things down. Let's go slower and to be fuller as well. So when I slow things down, I'm not trying to minimize anything. I'm actually trying to do the opposite. Let's go to this side and then let's go to that side and let's hear the fullness of your complaint or your concern. The impact of this tension, how it's feeling emotionally, what kind of impacts it's having on you and the people who make up your side. And this, for starters, is one way to burn up some of that ground fire fuel, is to let people be more full. And to do that, we practice something called deep democracy. It's a philosophy, but it's also an action. And in essence, it says to really understand or to work on an issue in a full way, you have to hear from everybody who's involved. All sides must be heard and supported. And this means especially marginalized voices and sides and lower ranked positions that maybe need extra support, something extraordinary in order to come out in the first place. It can sound like a very utopian kind of way to go or do things, but the challenge is it means we have to listen to things that we don't agree with. And that disagreement can be, I'm hearing something that I don't like, I'm not sure about. It could be something more serious, like I find that threatening, I find it offensive, I can't believe anybody who's in 2020 would think that way, etc., kind of morally outraged. And to actually try and care about those things, because those people in those positions are also represented in this conflict that I am in. And so process work is a very appreciative paradigm. And so we try and appreciate everything, even trouble. So the gift of polarity and deep democracy, the inevitable difference of this many billion human beings on the planet, the gift of this phase 2 is that it reminds us about diversity. It reminds us about the beauty and the challenge of our inherent differences. And that's something we try and hold with respect. In phase 3, it's very different. Phase 3 might have a voice that says, well, I'm here on my side and I know my thing, but I kind of also agree a little bit with you over there, or I'm kind of like that too. I'm a little bit like you sometimes, or maybe even for a moment or two, I'm kind of the same. I can see what you mean now and it makes more sense to me. So sides are still present, but there's actually now starting to be movement between them. At times, people can actually switch roles, even unintentionally, which is quite beautiful when it happens. And I want to say that process work is an awareness-based paradigm. And so I want to bring awareness about a signal that happens a lot. So one of the things that we do as a process facilitator is obviously treat things that are consciously said and spoken and very intentional, but also to work with expressions and communications that might not be, that are less intentional or unconscious, and to treat them with the same level of respect and interest. So the classic one that I find a lot, which I think is really fun to work with, is when I'm hearing from the other side, and then my side says something like, well, yeah, okay, but come on. And what the speaker is identifying with is still being against the other side, and they have lots to say about that. But that's not how they started. They started with yeah. And so as a facilitator, I might jump in and say, sorry to interrupt. I know you've got some disagreements, but I heard you say, yeah. So what was it, even a small little thing that you might be kind of okay with from that other side? Because I actually heard you say yes to it 3 times. Even if it's just a small part of you, let's check it out. It might be important. So this is the process of unfolding. And when we unfold out of a stuck polarity and we start to find a little bit more nuance in things, we immediately have access to new information, which could be a feeling state. It could be concrete information, data or something. But we're starting to have more holism. And what happens is our dynamics have to start shifting. When new information comes in, a system has to respond to it. That's just the way we're wired. So in essence, we're not just finding nuance among sides, that 2 sides of an issue might have more diversity among their side than they realized at first, but also that we start to find inside of people's own internal multi-sidedness. And this is the work of sitting in the fire. It can be tough work, but sometimes it can be fun, where it's more like the image, more like a campfire. There's still something burning, but now it's kind of like a centerpiece that pulls us together, and the sense of sides is diminishing a little bit. Phase 3 is very typically relieving to people. There's a sense of movement. There's a sense that it's not so severe, even if there's still very serious disagreements still playing out. But it tends to be a more hopeful state for people. So phase 4 is the final of 4 phases. And phase 4 isn't like the other 3 phases at all. In phase 4 moments, there is no conflict. There is no us and them. There's even temporarily a feeling that we're good. We are together and we're okay. And one typical example of this that can come and go quite quickly is shared laughter about something. Somebody said something a bit weird, and the way it played worked for everybody, and we all laughed. We found the same humor in a moment. And in that moment, polarity disappeared. Our issues didn't go away, our history, our values didn't change, but our feeling about each other shifted just for a moment there. And so there's a feeling of oneness. It's a settled feeling, a connected feeling. And this isn't the goal of process work, but the gift of phase 4 is rest and recharge. It's a break from the hard work of phase 2 and 3, and in some cases in phase 1. So this is a moment I actually witnessed in Greece a few years ago. It was quite profound that this woman in the middle of this huge conflict, there's 500 people in that room from about 40 countries, working on all the difficult moments and aspects of culture that we experience: race, gender, economics, immigration, politics, everything. And near the middle of the room, she just held up this flower. And people became silent. And there was a shared sense of a shift in energy. I can feel it right now. Actually, it makes me want to have tears. And the reality is we won't stay in phase 4 forever. It too will move, because phases aren't linear, because conflict isn't linear, because people aren't linear. So the phases come and go in different directions. They overlap and swish and swirl in different ways. And phase 4 isn't the goal of process work, conflict facilitation. So what is the goal? The goal in our work is to find more sustainable and effective outcomes around conflict, which requires us to go inside, include all voices. When we do less than that, we're leaving fuel behind for ground fire. What I found more personally, just to finish, often in organizations that I'm called into, there's conflict around a policy that we're supposed to be doing. And when we get more direct, more open, and we go into the conflict, we get to some phase 3 moments, which is really fun and beautiful. And often surprising for people is we don't need a new policy. We don't need to draft a new proposal and sign off on it. What we need is a different feeling about each other. We need to feel differently about each other. And when we get to enough of that, we're okay. We can move on, and we may or may not need to revisit anything in writing.
Yeah, that resonates with me. Like I said in my story, we tried to come up with rules and working norms, and that wasn't really what needed to happen. It was what you just described. So I just had a reflective moment. Maybe some other folks with us today might appreciate a moment to think back to that project failure, or perhaps another conflict is coming alive for you right now, and think about those phases. Do you recognize a moment of the phase 3 of the multi-sidedness? Do you have a memory of a phase 4 moment? And maybe just take a moment to think about the phases and your conflicts and see if you can make some connections between them. And you're more than welcome to keep reflecting on this post-conference, but as a conference attendee, I never have the energy for that. So know that we will have more opportunities to debrief following this. There's some great breakout sessions after as well. But for the moment, I have a question for you, David.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the main things that you're describing here that I think is different than what we do right now is to take the time to listen to all the voices. Take the time. And a lot of public servants in this call right now are probably thinking to themselves, we don't have that time. So, how can we justify spending time on this?
Mhm. Yeah, so there's some pretty big costs already in play in terms of time. The cost of unresolved conflict. And a lot of these, I would say, are very difficult to track and make a metric out of. So would you say that the 9 months of your project, Andy, was a failure? That's a 9-month time period times 3 people. It's not a total failure. Just some things came out of that were useful. But low trust takes time. Low trust leads to less creativity. We don't get to maybe innovative thinking very quickly because we're sitting around with a bunch of smoldering stuff. When people don't want to go along with something and they don't have the organizational rank to say no to it, it's very common for people to resist it in small ways, even unconsciously. Confidence goes down, absenteeism, and people quitting and leaving. And there's a loss in that. It takes time to train new people. And then the last thing here is also huge, which is it's really hard on people's health. When our nervous system is chronically being stimulated by conflict, it's very hard on our mental and physical health. So the impacts are pretty nasty around unresolved conflict. And there's lots and lots of psychological research on that workplace data that people can find easily.
Mhm. I can attest to that health cost. And we do invest in these areas in other ways. There are lots of initiatives around mental health and wellness that are going on. And perhaps this is a part of that solution. If those of us in this call today do see that as part of the solution, then what might be the next steps for us?
So let's give people an actual experience. I'd like to offer an experiential activity. And this is created with avoidance in mind, knowing that it's such a predominant factor in organizational conflict. So this is meant to be inner work, a preparation activity to help you engage for bringing a new attitude and a new resource to a conflict that you're already familiar with. So the real resource here is going to be you. We're going to use a little bit of inner visualization, thinking about the conflict and thinking about some other aspects of our life journey so far. And we're going to employ a little bit of hand movement or gesture, very minor, hand and arm. You can also use pen and paper to draw if that helps you. And if you'd like, or it works better for you, you can do the whole thing with your eyes closed as a visualization. So I'm offering 3 different levels there you can work at. It may be a little bit different than you used to thinking about or working about a conflict. So I'll just invite you to just give it a try, see what happens. So to start, I'll invite you to close your eyes, and if it's comfortable for you, or just to consider an active conflict that you're having already. And please don't choose the biggest, scariest, nastiest one. Don't choose anything that has the power to overwhelm you today. So I want to encourage you to pick something that's alive. It feels unsettled, unfinished. There's a bit of grit in it, and that will be helpful. So as you consider it, I'm going to invite you to study it. And so part of that is feeling a little bit into it and feeling some feelings you're probably familiar with. And the other part is to pull back and have a little bit of detachment and to do those 2 directions at the same time. It's not that simple. So half in, half out with your awareness. And I'm going to close my eyes because that helps me get into the space of it, even though I'm not considering a conflict myself right now. Watch yourself and the other person or people. If it helps you, you can float back in your inner vision to have a bit more perspective on it, a bit more distance, and kind of notice the energetic qualities, how the conflict expresses itself, how the conflict does its own thing. You're part of it, and it comes through you, but it's also part of others. Look at the metaphors that you might speak about, the concerns that people voice. The style, is it slow and passive aggressive? Is it in writing? Is it verbal in person? Does it go through other people, or is it very direct? Has it got a lot of heat in it, or is it kind of a slow burn? Does it jump up and down with energy, or is it more steady? And as you consider these factors, I'm going to invite you with your, let's say, your right hand, or with your paper, or with your inner vision, your right hand, to start making a movement that maybe starts to show a little bit of style of it. If it's like really direct like this, I might move my hand like that. If it's kind of like slow burn, I might move like that. If it's I feel tight, pulled back to myself, I might do that. So let your body make a translation, and don't let your mind get in the way. Trust that your body is doing the right thing, even if your mind doesn't really understand fully in the usual way what your arm and hand or your drawing might be doing. And I do that just by staying connected to the essence and the style of that conflict and letting my body just move a little. And that's it. So as you make movement or posture or drawing or an inner vision, also remember it, because we're going to come back to it in a while. And stay and notice who you are and what it's like to be doing this a little bit as you engage with the conflict in this way. Then I'll invite you to take an extra big inhalation in, and then just really try and release the conflict right out of your system. You might shake your hands if that helps you get it out there a bit. You can maybe move your image away from you so you're not looking at it for the moment. And we're going to do a second part. So the second part goes like this. If you want to, again, invite you to close your eyes. And this time, actually, I'll invite you to also let your head and neck move a little and let go of their usual dance with gravity, where they have the head has to stay upright. I've got to hold my shoulders in a certain position. And just let yourself a little be floppy a little bit and loose. We're going to try and let go of some of our usual ways of thinking and doing for a minute. And as you do that, I'll do it with you. I like moving like that. My neck feels stiff, and it's good to move it. I'm going to invite you to consider what I'm going to call an elder figure. And this elder figure could be a human being of any age, even a young person. It could also be a non-human being, like an animal, a plant, or any aspect of nature. A massive tree or a storm you saw, an amazing view you got to experience, your backyard. You might have grown up with a park nearby. Who knows what it might be? But it has these qualities. So an elder figure is one who treats everyone like their own best friend or even their own child. And they want the best possible outcome for everyone involved in the trouble that's going on. And they react with a kind of wisdom and clarity that kind of shows maybe they've been in this scene 1,000 times already. They've already seen it. Well, there's nothing really shocks them. So imagine a time when you've connected to a presence like that, or even a little bit like that. It was a little bit extraordinary, or maybe it was quite extraordinary. And begin again, like we did before, to study that experience. How did you first notice it, that elder figure? How did you notice its presence? How did you turn towards it? What happened? And in doing so, you start to study how the elder expresses all that caring and that wisdom and that openness to trying to help and support. And so notice how it does it, from the way it might sit or speak or sway in the wind. And again, you might want to drift back in your vision so you can see even more of its totality, the fullness of how this elder expresses its caring. And as you study its energetic style, I'll invite you to also now, with the left hand or arm, or with a different drawing, or with the picture you have in your mind, to let your body now, through that left hand and arm, begin to move in a way that the elder is like. If my arm was going to translate my experience of that elder, it would have to do this. And it's the body that knows how to do that. So just trust. It may be a very subtle thing you're doing. It may be stillness. Just trust that that left-handed arm or the drawing or whatever is capturing it. It's like, yes, it's like that. I feel the elder presence and it's like this. Maybe like this or whatever. And so stay with the elder energy now. Stay with it. And now at the same time with the right arm, begin to bring in the conflict energy at the same time. This might be the part where it's like, what? This is weird. It's like, just give it a try. See what happens with no agenda about what's supposed to happen. Let your mind be open. Beginner mind, I don't know. And let the two energies begin to relate to each other through you, through these movements, or through drawing, through your inner vision. Let them relate and learn from each other. How do they interact? What happens now? The movements may stay the same. They may shift. Just let them. There's no wrong way to do it. You're following yourself and these two different energies brought together now. As you go along, look for information. Notice what's happening for you. There may be insights that come, new ways of seeing. Notice feelings in your body and emotional feelings. There could be a message that comes through the body, through the mind, either way, or both. Again, there's no agenda, just being present to what's happening and trying to pay attention to it as it develops. Follow yourself. Follow yourself. And we'll look for a moment of completion or a pause that feels okay. And really encourage you to make a note, a physical note on paper or on your computer or something, of anything that was mysterious, interesting, obviously important, or something you'd want to remember, questions or weirdnesses that came up. A lot can happen in a short time, unfolding a process like that. And it's great to have a note or a drawing can help too later on. So I'd love to invite you to note down in the chat anything that you thought was interesting or valuable. And that could be fuel for our debrief that we're going to have in a minute. So I'd love to stay longer in this, but because of time, I have to move on. I just want to say thank you. Thanks for trying something new, maybe really new. Conflict work isn't easy. You had a lot of choices in this conference because it's massive, and you chose this, so thank you very much for that. And if you want to debrief with Andee and I, we're going to be live in a breakout room afterwards. You can get more information, you can ask questions, and you can get direct information on process work. Andee, thank you so much for inviting me and collaborating on this. It was great to work on this with you. And also thank you FWD50 for having me, and I'll put it back to Andee to close.
Thank you so much, David. And like David said, we're here to debrief further. But additionally, here's David. Here's his website, his email. And if you check out his website, you'll see some trainings that he has coming up.
Right.
Looking really exciting. I'm going to the next one myself. And here's me. I am not a process work facilitator, but my Twitter's pretty fire. So follow me, Andee Pittman UX. And I thank you all again. We'll see you later.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.